Your modern superbike? The one that feels impossibly fast, that makes 200 horsepower and hits 180 miles per hour, is basically a neutered version of what they were building in the 1990s. That's right, the bikes we're riding today are actually slower and more restricted than what was rolling off production lines 25 years ago. The 90s were filled with strange one-offs, forgotten flagships, and engineering miracles that changed the rules before vanishing into history. What you're about to see is the hidden history of motorcycles that should never have existed, but somehow redefined what speed could look like. Before we start, smash that like button if you think motorcycles from the 90s were just built different. Number 12 on our list, Kawasaki GPZ900R Ninja. Kawasaki's engineers did something that changed everything. They took their GPZ900R and wrapped it in plastic. Now, that sounds boring, but here's what nobody understood at the time. Those fairings weren't just for looks. They were creating a wind tunnel on two wheels. Suddenly, instead of fighting 150 miles per hour headwinds, riders were slicing through air like a knife through butter. The Kawasaki GPZ900R Ninja wasn't supposed to be a speed demon. It was supposed to be a touring bike with some sporting pretensions. They took their new liquid-cooled inline 4 and wrapped it in full bodywork. Not just a small fairing, but complete aerodynamic coverage that turned the motorcycle into a wind-cutting missile. The result? 151 miles per hour. From a production motorcycle in 1984. To put that in perspective, that's faster than most sports cars of the era. Ferrari's Testarossa, which cost 10 times more, could barely match it. The Ninja was doing supercar speeds for motorcycle money, and nobody saw it coming. But here's the real genius. This wasn't just a straight-line monster. The liquid cooling meant it could run hard without overheating. The full fairing meant riders could actually stay on at high speeds, and the chassis was stable enough to handle the power. The GPZ900R held its own through the entire 1990s, even as newer, more powerful machines arrived. Some riders argue it was the last truly reliable speed bike before manufacturers got obsessed with chasing numbers. What started as a practical touring machine accidentally became the template for every superbike that followed. The Ninja proved that motorcycles could be faster than anyone imagined. And once that secret was out, there was no going back. The speed wars had begun, and they were about to get completely out of hand. Number 11. Honda's answer to the Ninja that nobody saw coming. While Kawasaki was celebrating their GPZ900R success, Honda's engineers were quietly building something that would make the Ninja look tame. The CBR1000F wasn't just fast, it was Honda fast. And there's a difference. Here's what Honda understood that others missed. Raw speed means nothing if you can't use it. The CBR1000F hit 164 miles per hour. But more importantly, it could do it all day long without drama. This was Honda's philosophy in action. Take Kawasaki's concept and make it better in every way that actually matters. Smoother power delivery, better aerodynamics, and that legendary Honda reliability that meant you could ride it hard for 200,000 miles and it would still start every morning. The real genius was in the details. Honda used their V4 engine from the VFR series, but tuned it for sustained high-speed running. While other manufacturers were chasing peak horsepower numbers, Honda was building an engine that could maintain 150 miles per hour for hours without breaking a sweat. Sport touring before anyone called it that. The CBR1000F could embarrass pure sport bikes on the highway, then carry you and a passenger across Europe in comfort. It was the thinking rider's speed machine. Some motorcycle historians argue the CBR1000F was actually faster than Honda claimed. Independent tests showed it could hit closer to 170 miles per hour in perfect conditions. Honda, being Honda, published conservative numbers and let the bike speak for itself. This was the machine that taught Honda they could win the speed wars, not just with horsepower, but with engineering excellence. It was the foundation for everything that came after, including the bike that would eventually dethrone Kawasaki's speed crown. The CBR1000F proved that sometimes the best way to go fast is to think about everything else first. Number 10. The bike that proved you don't need 1,000 Cs to embarrass the big boys. The Suzuki GSXR750 was the giant killer of the 1990s, a machine that could hit 164 miles per hour while weighing less than most people's lunch. This wasn't just about raw speed. This was about what happens when engineers get obsessed with the power-to-weight ratio. Here's the thing about the GSXR750 that made it special. While everyone else was adding displacement and complexity, Suzuki went the opposite direction. They took everything they learned from racing and built the lightest, most focused speed machine they could imagine. The result was pure physics in action. Less weight meant better acceleration, better braking, and handling that made the bigger bikes feel like freight trains. At 164 miles per hour, it was fast enough to keep up with the leader bikes, but nimble enough to make them look clumsy in the corners. Suzuki's aluminum frame was revolutionary, not just lighter than steel, but stiffer and more responsive. The engine was a screaming four-cylinder that loved to rev, the kind of power plant that rewarded riders who weren't afraid to use the whole tachometer. But here's what really made the GSXR special. It was affordable. While exotic superbikes cost as much as cars, the 750 offered 90% of the performance for half the price. It democratized speed in a way that terrified insurance companies and thrilled a generation of riders. Some argue the mid-90s GSXR 750 was the perfect balance. Fast enough to satisfy speed addicts, light enough to carve canyons, and reliable enough for daily use. It was the last time a 750 could legitimately claim to be one of the fastest bikes on the planet. The GSXR 750 proved that in the Speed Wars, sometimes the smallest fighter hits the hardest. Number 9. Yamaha's thunderous answer to the Speed Wars that everyone seemed to forget. The YZF1000R Thunderace hit 168 miles per hour and proved that sometimes the most important bikes are the ones history overlooks. While Honda and Kawasaki were grabbing headlines, Yamaha quietly built a machine that could embarrass both of them in the real world. Here's what made the Thunderace special. It was the first bike designed specifically for the post-ZX11 era. Yamaha's engineers studied every speed king that came before and built something that combined the best of all worlds. FZR power, refined aerodynamics, and handling that made the bigger bikes feel clumsy. The inline-4 engine was pure Yamaha, smooth, reliable, and absolutely relentless in its power delivery. While competitors chased peak horsepower numbers, Yamaha built an engine that made every mile per hour feel usable and accessible. But here's the Thunderace's secret weapon. It was lighter and more agile than the true superbikes, but fast enough to run with them on the highway. In the canyons, it could make riders on Blackbirds and ZX11s look like amateurs. The timing was perfect. Launched in 1996, just as the Speed Wars were reaching their peak. The Thunderace proved that you didn't need to be the absolute fastest to be the most fun to ride. Some argue the Thunderace was the last pure sport bike before manufacturers got obsessed with straight-line speed above everything else. It represented speed with soul, performance with character. Number 8. The Italian masterpiece that most people have never heard of. While the Japanese manufacturers were throwing horsepower at the speed problem, a small Italian company called Bimota was approaching it like artists. The YB6 EXUP wasn't just fast, it was sculpture that happened to do 170 miles per hour. Here's what made Bimota different. They didn't build engines. They took the best power plants from other manufacturers and wrapped them in chassis that bordered on jewelry. For the YB6, they chose Yamaha's revolutionary EXUP Inline 4, the same engine that powered the FZR1000. But this is where Bimota's genius showed. That Yamaha engine was good for about 170 miles per hour in the FZR, in Bimota's lightweight aerodynamic chassis. It could hit the same 170 miles per hour while feeling like a completely different machine. The difference was in every detail. hand-welded aluminum frames that were stiffer than anything the mass producers could build, bodywork shaped in wind tunnels rather than styling studios, and suspension components that cost more than most people's entire motorcycles. Only a few hundred YB6 EXUPs were ever built, each one essentially hand-assembled by craftsmen who treated motorcycles like art projects. The price reflected that exclusivity. These bikes cost more than most cars and required patience that most riders didn't have. Some motorcycle purists argue the YB6 represented the peak of 1990s engineering before mass production and cost-cutting took over. Every component was the best available, regardless of price or complexity. The YB6 EXUP proved something important about the Speed Wars. It wasn't just about who could build the fastest bike. It was about who could build the most beautiful way to go that fast. This was speed as high art, and it would never be this pure again. Number 7. The bike that proved style and speed could be the same thing. The Ducati 916 wasn't the fastest machine on this list, but it might have been the most important. At 162 miles per hour, it was quick enough to embarrass most supercars, but that's not why it changed everything. This was Massimo Tamburini's masterpiece, a design so perfect that 25 years later, every sport bike still borrows from its proportions. Single-sided swing arm, under-seat exhausts, that aggressive, forward-leaning stance that screamed speed even when it was standing still. But here's what made the 916 special. It wasn't just beautiful. That Desmodromic V-twin engine produced power in a way that made riders forget about horsepower numbers. Pure, linear torque that pulled from 2,000 RPM to redline, the kind of engine character that made every ride feel like a religious experience. Ducati's approach to speed was completely different from the Japanese manufacturers. While Honda and Kawasaki were chasing peak horsepower numbers, Ducati was building an engine that made every mile per hour feel earned. The 916 rewarded skill. It demanded respect. And it turned every ride into a conversation between rider and machine. World Superbike racing proved the 916's credentials. Carl Fogarty dominated the championship on factory versions, while privateers could buy nearly identical machines from dealers. This wasn't just a fast bike, it was a race bike you could ride to work. Some argue the 916 saved Ducati from bankruptcy. Its success in racing and on the street proved that Italian engineering could compete with Japanese efficiency. More importantly, it proved that motorcycles could be art and athlete at the same time. The 916's legacy lives in every modern superbike. That aggressive styling, that focus on handling over straight-line speed, that idea that a motorcycle should stir your soul as much as it moves your body. This was speed with character, and it changed how the world thought about what a fast bike could be. Number 6. The bike that taught everyone else how exhaust pipes were supposed to work. The Yamaha FZ1000EXUP hit 170 miles per hour, but that's not what made it revolutionary. This was the machine that introduced exhaust power valves to the motorcycle world, a technology so clever that everyone immediately started copying it. Here's how EXUP worked. At low RPM, a butterfly valve in the exhaust kept the pipe short for better torque. As engine speed increased, the valve opened to create a longer exhaust path for peak power. It was like having two different engines in the same bike, one for daily riding and one for maximum attack. The result was unlike anything riders had experienced. Smooth, usable power everywhere in the rev range, then a surge of aggression as the EXUP valve opened and the engine came alive. The FZR could cruise at highway speeds without drama, then transform into a 170 mile/hour missile at full throttle. Yamaha's aluminum beam frame was another revelation. Lighter than steel but stiffer than anything else on the market. Combined with that revolutionary power plant, the FZR1000 handled like a much smaller bike while delivering big bore performance. The 1989 launch was perfectly timed. Just as the speed wars were heating up, Yamaha dropped a machine that combined cutting-edge technology with real-world usability. While competitors focused on peak power numbers, Yamaha built an engine that worked everywhere. Some motorcycle historians argue the EXUP system was more important than fuel injection. It showed how electronics could make engines more versatile rather than just more powerful. Every modern bike with variable exhaust timing owes something to Yamaha's 1989 breakthrough. The FZ1000EXUP proved that the speed wars weren't just about going fast, they were about going fast while remaining civilized. It was technology in service of the riding experience, and it set the standard for everything that followed. This was the bike that showed the future, even if nobody realized it at the time. Number 5. The bike that officially started the arms race. The Kawasaki ZX11 wasn't just fast, it was the first production motorcycle to crack 170 miles per hour, and once that barrier was broken, there was no going back. Here's what made the ZX11 revolutionary: ram air intake. While other manufacturers were still using traditional airboxes, Kawasaki's engineers figured out how to use speed to create more speed. At highway velocities, those front-facing intakes were literally stuffing extra air into the engine. The result was devastating: 176 miles per hour in independent testing. That wasn't just fast for a motorcycle. That was fast, period. Ferrari's flagship couldn't match it. Porsche's best was barely close, and Kawasaki was selling it for the price of a decent used car. But here's the real genius. The ZX11 was stable at those speeds. Kawasaki's engineers had learned from the GPZ900R's success and built a chassis that could handle the power. This wasn't just a dyno queen. It was a machine you could actually ride at full throttle. The ZX11 held the fastest production bike title for 6 years, from 1990 to 1996. That's an eternity in the speed wars, and it proved Kawasaki had built something special. Some argue the ZX11 was the last pure speed bike, before manufacturers started worrying about emissions, safety regulations, and liability lawsuits. It was engineered for one purpose: to be the fastest thing on 2 wheels. The ZX11 forced every other manufacturer to respond, and that response would define the rest of the 1990s. Number 4. Honda's declaration of war on Kawasaki's speed crown. The CBR1100X Super Blackbird wasn't just built to be fast, it was engineered specifically to destroy the ZX11's 6-year reign. And at 178 miles per hour, it succeeded spectacularly. Honda's approach was typically methodical. They didn't just want to beat Kawasaki's top speed, they wanted to embarrass it. The Blackbird was faster, smoother, more comfortable, and more reliable than anything Kawasaki had ever built. Here's what made the Blackbird special. It was the first motorcycle designed entirely in a wind tunnel. Every surface was shaped for minimum drag. From the nose fairing to the tail section, nothing was left to chance. Honda even specified the rider's position to optimize aerodynamics. The inline-4 engine was a masterpiece of Honda engineering. Smooth power delivery from idle to redline, with enough torque to pull strongly from any RPM. While the ZX11 felt brutal and aggressive, the Blackbird felt refined, like a precision instrument designed for sustained high-speed travel. Guinness World Records officially recognized the Blackbird as the world's fastest production motorcycle, a title Honda wore proudly in their advertising. But more importantly, riders could actually use that speed. The Blackbird was stable, comfortable, and confidence-inspiring at velocities that made other bikes feel dangerous. The Blackbird proved Honda's philosophy: don't just build the fastest bike, build the best fast bike. It was a lesson that would serve them well, because an even bigger threat was already being developed in Suzuki's secret testing facilities. For 3 years, the Blackbird was the undisputed king of speed, until Suzuki changed the rules forever. Number 3. The Honda NR750 wasn't just a motorcycle, it was a technological flex. Oval pistons, titanium connecting rods, carbon fiber fairings. This was what happened when Honda's engineers were told to build the most advanced bike possible, and money was no object. Here's what made the NR750 completely insane. It had oval pistons. Not round ones like every other motorcycle in history, but actual oval-shaped pistons that allowed Honda to fit 32 valves into what was technically a V4 engine. It was like having a V8 in a V4 package. The kind of engineering that made other manufacturers question their life choices. The result was 185 miles per hour from a machine that looked like it had been transported from the future. But that speed number doesn't tell the whole story. This was about Honda proving they could out-engineer anyone on the planet. Every component was exotic. Titanium connecting rods that cost more than most people's cars. Carbon fiber bodywork, when most bikes still used fiberglass. And an engine management system that was decades ahead of its time. Only 300 NR750s were ever built. Each one essentially a hand-assembled prototype that cost more than a house. Honda lost money on every single one. And they didn't care. This wasn't about profit. This was about making a statement. Number 2. The machine that proved one man's garage could embarrass the entire motorcycle industry. The Britain V1000 hit 188 miles per hour, using technology that wouldn't become mainstream for another 20 years. This wasn't just fast. This was a glimpse into the future, hand-built by a furniture maker in New Zealand. John Britton had no business building motorcycles. But that's exactly why the V1000 was revolutionary. While established manufacturers were trapped by convention, Britton started with a blank sheet of paper and asked one simple question. What would a motorcycle look like if we ignored everything we thought we knew? The answer was radical. Carbon fiber chassis, when everyone else used steel or aluminum. Double wishbone front suspension, borrowed from Formula One. Under-seat radiators for perfect weight distribution. Computer-controlled ignition when most bikes still used carburetors. Only 10 V1000s were ever built. Each one essentially a handcrafted prototype that cost more than most people's houses. But those 10 bikes dominated at Daytona, embarrassed factory teams, and proved that the future didn't have to come from Japan or Europe. Here's what makes the Britain legendary. It wasn't just ahead of its time, it was ahead of our time. Modern superbikes are finally catching up to ideas Britain implemented in 1992. The V1000 proved something important about innovation. The best ideas don't come from the biggest companies. They come from crazy people willing to risk everything for a vision. This was speed as art, engineering as rebellion, and it almost rewrote the rules of what was possible. And, finally, number 1. The bike that was so fast, it scared the entire motorcycle industry into surrender. The Suzuki GSX1300R Hayabusa didn't just win the speed wars, it ended them. 194 miles per hour from the factory. That wasn't just a new record. That was a statement that some barriers should never be broken. Suzuki's engineers had spent years preparing for this moment, studying every competitor, testing in secret, building a machine that wouldn't just beat the competition. It would make them irrelevant. The Hayabusa was more aerodynamic than the Blackbird, more powerful than the ZX11, and more stable than anything that had come before. Here's what made the Hayabusa unstoppable. 1,300 Cs of displacement producing power like a natural disaster. While other manufacturers chased peak horsepower, Suzuki built an engine that made massive torque everywhere in the rev range. The acceleration was violent, the top speed was terrifying, and the handling was surprisingly civilized. The name Hayabusa means peregrine falcon, the fastest bird in the world. It was perfect marketing for a machine that redefined what fast could mean. Within months of its launch, every major manufacturer agreed to an informal speed limit of 186 miles per hour. The speed wars were over. Because Suzuki had built something too fast for anyone's good. Some argue the Hayabusa saved motorcycling from government regulation. Others claim it robbed us of even more extreme machines. Either way, it proved that unlimited speed was possible, and exactly why it was a terrible idea. The Hayabusa didn't just win the 1990s speed wars, it ended them forever. The 1990s proved that when engineers stop caring about being reasonable, magic happens. These 12 machines didn't just go fast. They redefined what fast could look like, and changed motorcycling forever. The speed wars may be over, but the legend of these bikes will never die. See you on the next video.